How can a parent practically help a child navigate the complexities of a relationship with Hashem? Like, for example, dealing with loss or the bad things happening in the world. How can a parent help their child develop their relationship with Hashem when they themselves are struggling? Some of these questions are deep Jewish philosophical questions. And you might think, okay, we're gonna have a rabbi on, but because parents themselves are not necessarily going to have the knowledge base of a rabbi, but will be interacting in a more natural way, because these types of questions are on children's minds all the time. And we'll need to know the right way to respond depending on the age of the child and the child's development. As such, we took a clinical perspective with Dr. Aviva Goldstein, who's a lecturer, an educator, a family counselor. She lives in Yerushalayim, and she has a very unique space where she is, has a combination of the worlds of positive psychology, parenting, and Judaism all in one. She is very well positioned to answer these questions and much more. And without further ado, enjoy the episode.
Raising children in general is not easy. Throw in the desire to have passionate and committed Jews, now that's next level hard. My name is Rabbi Irman Shell. As an educator, parent educator, and a parent of young children, I'm on the journey just like you to learn how we can best parent our children to take care of the whole child and each child, and to help guide them in their journey of their relationship with Hashem. With weekly episodes answering your biggest parenting questions, you will gain the best practices you need to raise your children the way you want, to raise the Jews next door.
Super excited to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about how to raise the Jews next door.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So, this week, we are really focusing in on the building of a relationship, how to help our children build a relationship with Hashem, and really getting into the practical component of it. So I guess let's dive right in. Everyone has highs and lows, right? Highs and lows with everything in life, but specifically also with their relationship with Hashem. And that being the case, how can a parent their child properly when they themselves are struggling with what they're trying to parent their children about? I mean, that could be with regards to anything, but I guess we'll get more specifically with regards to parenting them about having a relationship with Hashem.
It's a great question, but I know you want to get to the Hashem part, but I would actually start not with the Hashem part, right? We're sort of facing this massive challenge right now with raising kids who have internalized messages of total perfectionism and achievement and success. And there are lots of reasons, lots of places where it comes from. I won't bore you with all the different research studies that there are. But we know that this generation of children and adolescents are really struggling with what sort of the buzzword now is resilience, right? Mm-hmm. And so when things get hard, our kids tend to not really know what to do about that. Because they're so used to success and achievement, because our kids tend to be, high achieving, successful kids, and that's sort of an emphasis within the community. But also because, the pluses and the minuses of having parents and schools and communities that sort of help to pick up the pieces. And so kids, thankfully, are not left on their own to sort of clean up a big mess. The downside of that is that kids don't know how to clean up their own mess, metaphorically. Right. I mean, also maybe not metaphorically, but I'm using metaphor here, right?
I have a little bit of both.
And so I would say, I think that Hashem piece fits into the same category, that our kids are used to really just getting it and having it work and have things make sense and having the answers. And all of a sudden, when they don't have an answer to something, that can be somewhat destabilizing. And I think we, as sort of the responsible adults, the parents, the educators, whoever it might be in the community, I mean, I'll be honest, we're all also a bit perfectionists, right? And so the question inherent in the question, right, is there must be something wrong if I'm struggling in my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. How could I possibly parent my child to have a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu? And the reality is that we do our kids a disservice when we shield them from our struggle. Because it means when they face struggles at some point in their lives, whether it's childhood, adolescence, adulthood, if we haven't modeled struggle for them, then when they face those inevitable struggles, they don't have a model. They don't know what to do. And so I think in many ways, when we're struggling with our relationship with Hashem, with observance, whatever the thing might be that sort of comes in waves, I don't think we shield our kids from that. I think the best thing we can do is sort of bring that out into the open. Obviously, developmentally appropriate and age appropriate and, however specific you want to get is totally subjective. But the notion that if I'm having a struggle in my relationship with God, that therefore must be an impediment to my raising my child to have a relationship with God, I think is some of like the thinking that's got us into a little bit of trouble, in general with this generation of kids.
So what does that look like if you're being transparent with your child? Like, let's go through different ages. Let's say you have a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, or bringing it up to 10 and then 12. What does that conversation look like? Like, take us through it a little bit.
So obviously, younger kids are much more concrete, and older kids are much more abstract thinkers. And so, we're sort of using this category of relationship with Hashem, but that could really mean a lot of different things. Is it ritualistic halachic observance? Is it an idea that I'm struggling with? Is it the actual sort of spiritual connection? Meaning, depending on where we're at. And so I think it depends on, let's say with a young kid, with something that's very concrete, because that's where they're at developmentally. I know you may not be in the mood to daven. Sometimes I'm not in the mood to daven. Like, I totally understand that I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm cranky, but like, sometimes we just have to do the things we have to do. I also don't like unloading the dishwasher, but if I don't unload the dishwasher isn't going to get unloaded. And so, that sometimes we do things we don't really feel like we're in the mood to do, right? Something very concrete.
And do you say it to them in the moment? Like in a moment, like when an adult is like, I really don't want to go to davening today, or I really just don't want, I'm not excited for X, whatever it is. I'm not excited for this upcoming Yontif or this Shabbat, whatever it is. Is that something you say so explicitly like that with them? Like, I mean, what's the proper balance, I guess, between sharing or oversharing? What would constitute like oversharing?
I'll be totally honest and say, I don't know, because it's like completely subjective, right? It's not at all one size fits all. I do think that it's up to the parent to be really super honest with themselves. And if I'm never in the mood for fill in the blank, davening, Shabbos, whatever the thing may be. So that's like one kind of thing. If I'm typically like a big davener and I just am not feeling it today, then sharing that with my kid is sharing sort of what happens when I deviate from my norm, right? And does it, result in an identity crisis? Or is it just like sometimes things are hard and sometimes we just don't feel it? Whereas if I'm never in the mood to daven and I'm always saying to my kid, I really don't want to go to shul. Okay, so then you're sending a very different message, right? But if it's something that's sort of a deviation, I think that's actually really healthy because they've seen in the past that you've loved davening. I'm just using davening as an example. And they'll see next week that you'll be back to yourself when you're going to be excited to go to shul or daven in the living room or whatever it is. But in this moment, you're not feeling it. And then the follow-up question, of course, is if you're not feeling it, do you do it anyways? Right. And again, that's very subjective, right? But it goes to sort of the dishwasher example. Like, do we sort of convey that sense of commandedness and, obligation or not? And again, I think the parent has to be honest with themselves and, only if you're going to do it, whether you're in the mood or not. Right. But,
right.
And I think that's part of the equation for the parent to sort of do the cheshbon on their own, to say like, am I never in the mood for, I don't know, Shabbos? Or is it like just this week? It's such a long week and I'm really exhausted and I'm really stressed. And, and then by next Shabbos, I'm going to be excited about it again.
Right. Okay. That's a very, very good way of looking at it. So I hear, meaning in terms of, in general, it is healthy for us to be able to share in general.
Yeah. I would think so.
What meaning besides for, I guess, let's say, a time where, besides for saying, this is a struggle for me right now, I don't want to. What would another example, let's say, be of a type of a conversation that one would have with their children of not, like, let's say, let's go away from davening, for example. Someone's just not feeling it in general, general halachic observance. Let's say, let's go to like an extreme. A parent's really going through a rough time and it just really doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So how do they navigate that type of conversation with their child? Because really, like, they know that they're going through a funk. They knew that they're going through something in life. They just went through a really, let's say maybe a tragedy or something like that, that's really affecting them in a harsh way. But they don't want that for their children. So how do they, because I'm not saying that they should, of course they should be open with their children. But at a certain point, is there a level there where they should be shielding, or is there, no, we should be totally open and honest? And
again, I don't know, right? I'm being totally honest, like it's totally subjective. My gut instinct is to say, again, if we take the example out of the Yiddishkeit piece and we sort of project it against a different example, would we come with the same answer? So let's say, over the course of the lifetime of a marriage, or sort of the drama and the politics of family life. Every marriage has their ups and downs. Every family has those months when things are just like awesome. And, those months when like everything seems to be, crumbling a little bit. So if the parent is in that space, the child is probably going to pick up on something's bothering mommy. I don't necessarily know what it is, but something's bothering mommy. She doesn't seem like herself. Now, mommy or Tati or Ima or Abba or Mama or whoever you want to be in the story, right, has total, freedom with what they want to say to their child. But if something, let's say there's a strain in someone's marriage, how explicit is the parent going to share about their marriage with their child? Probably not so much. They might sort of validate the child's suspicion. I know you can tell I'm not feeling like myself. I know you can tell things aren't going as well as they usually are. I'm just working some things out. It's going to be fine. I just need some time to figure these things out. So it validates the suspicion on the child's end, which is like, something seems up with mommy. Why is she being so weird? But it doesn't go into like an inappropriate amount of sharing, right? So I think if we put the same thing back into the context of Yiddishkeit, I think the same thing could apply. If all of a sudden we stop having company, or if all of a sudden stop going to minyan, or all of a sudden we stop doing whatever the sort of observable behavior might be, the kid's going to pick up on it. Our kids are really, really smart, and they're very, very observant. And so you can validate your child's suspicions. So they don't think like, oh my God, am I going crazy? Like, am I seeing things wrong? You could say, yeah, I'm going through a rough thing. I'm working it out. I have really good people to talk to. I don't know what my answer is yet, but I'm going to hopefully get to an answer soon. But, sometimes life is hard and I'm taking some time to figure it out. I think that kind of sharing is appropriate. I think once you pass a certain threshold of like, you're putting children into adult issues, that's where it gets a little, sticky.
Right. Yeah, that's a strong point.
How would you say that parents can help children to navigate, let's say, more difficult? Meaning not just like when they're, having an own personal challenge, but let's say there's a real tragedy, or, something really, really challenging, a loss of a loved one, or whatever it is. How does one navigate that conversation with their child, which can sometimes lead one to question, their relationship with it?
I will not say the name of the institution, nor would I ever, God forbid, say the name of the individuals. But many years ago, when I was just starting out, I was starting out as a classroom teacher for younger children. I won't even say what age. And over the summer, I was handed the Parsha curriculum. And I'm reading through it, prepping for the school year. And I'm reading through all the Parshiot of Breshit. And it's like, we're getting half the story. And I start to realize every time someone dies in the Parsha, the curriculum skips over it. Now, this is for young kids. Okay.
No way.
So,
wow.
Or they would just sort of like allude to it and then move past it. So I went to whoever was the person that I would go to with this kind of question. And I said, something seems funny. Like we're missing something here. Like, every Parsha in Breshit, somebody's dying, at least one person, right? Like that's sort of like the story of everything, right? And I think it might be the only professional machlokas I've ever gotten in my life. Like I'm not a machlokas person at all. But this person was telling me how inappropriate it is to talk about death with young children. And so of course we're going to skip over it. They're young. Bear in mind, they weren't so young. And my point was like, death is just inevitable, right? Like
it's a part of life.
It should happen at all the right times, but it happens to everyone. And if we're looking at little kids, then please God, if things go right, the first death they're going to encounter is most likely going to be a grandparent, which means that the person they want to ask questions to, their parent, is going to be in Avelis and is going to be distracted and may not have like the bandwidth to answer all the questions.
And I said, point.
Don't we owe it to our children to normalize death from the Torah? And then we're sort of talking about, the end of life with these characters that the kids become familiar with, starting somewhere around September, October, right? And so they can start to understand that it's just a normalized part of, what happens. It was a long, drawn out battle. In the end, I won, thankfully. And I was able to teach it in the way that I felt most comfortable. But I think that's part of the challenge. So many of our kids confront death for the first time in real time. And we haven't really figured out a way to normalize death. And I don't want to say to normalize tragedy, because that's what makes it tragic, right? It's not normal. Right. but to normalize death as just a part of life. And so I think lechatchila, before our kids are even confronting, God forbid, tragic situations, if we can sort of incorporate ideas about death just sort of being the natural course of things, then when they encounter it, they don't have to learn everything from scratch, right? Now, of course, that doesn't answer the question, okay, but shoot, I have like a 9-year-old and I didn't do that. And now, God forbid, lo aleinu, there's some tragedy in the community. And now what am I supposed to do?
Before we even get to that question then, so let's just let's start at the basics then.
Yeah.
What does that conversation look like? Meaning, what is the best way to be bringing it in a natural way? That way they are kind of primed for it.
Well, if you're like a Parsha family, I think that's the way to do it, right? Because it has so many of the different elements of death in a very, like we're talking about before, little kids are very concrete thinkers. So, she died. He bought a cave. He buried her in the cave. She couldn't feel that it was cold or dark because you can't feel if it's cold or dark, right? Very, very sort of concrete, and sort of introducing it that way. So if, let's say, years later, they're at a funeral or something like that and they watch the burial, they already know, no, that person isn't going to be scared of the dark because they don't see anymore. Right. And once we introduce those concepts much earlier on, I'm not saying, God forbid, it makes it easier, but it makes it less foreign, let's say. If
it's also a little bit less of a taboo at that point.
Correct.
Meaning they've heard it already. It's not like it's like crazy.
Correct.
Right. So then, okay, so now let's get back to what you were saying. I mean, it doesn't answer that question of like, how then do we, someone who didn't prime them and now is like, wait, but Hashem, how could Hashem do this? Like, how could Hashem take away my grandmother? How could Hashem take away my grandfather? Or whatever that type of situation is.
Right. The sort of like quote unquote more normal course of thing. So I do think you do like, a deep dive into the primer of, death and burial. I think you talk about sort of the way Yiddishkeit approaches it. And what's really nice is almost anywhere that you're on the spectrum of Jewish life, in many ways, a lot of the mourning stuff is somewhat universal, even if there are different minhagim, but all of us sort of relate to hespedim, and all of us have burials, and all of us have shiva. Now, what your shiva might look like might be different than what somebody else's shiva look like, but the concept of shiva is somewhat universal. And so I think whoever is listening can sort of tap into these ideas of using sort of our minhagim and halachos of mourning to talk about, the value of community and our loved ones coming around us, when we're going through a hard time, and that we're not supposed to go through a hard time by ourselves, and that it's okay to emote, whether we're crying or screaming or sitting quietly. All of those are totally normal and acceptable responses and things like that. In addition to all sort of like the concrete, practical, how to, let's say, of the dying stuff. And I'm saying that, God forbid, not without sensitivity. I think there's also an opportunity for like a values education piece, which is like the humility stuff, which is, we don't know. I don't know. I don't know why Safta died now. I don't know why Zadie had to be sick. I don't know why. And sometimes we just don't know. And whether that's comfortable or uncomfortable, that's just the reality. And being able to convey that to our kids can be a game changer. There was a survey done years ago. Scott Goldberg and a bunch of other people at YU did some research on this phenomenon of flipping out, where, American kids come to Israel for the year, they go to yeshiva seminary, they get super frum, and they go back. And so they actually did research to understand, like, what are the psychological sort of elements of flipping out. It's a fascinating piece of research.
I'm sure you have a lot to say on that.
Anyone that's interested, I love it. I'm like a big data nerd. But one of the things that came out of that study is that students tend to really admire the teachers that say, I don't know, let me find out for you. And very often the kinds of conversations our kids are having in high school are with teachers who have an expertise over their class material, let's say, right? They have a certain curriculum, they've taught the test, they've done all the different things. And so by and large, with few exceptions, most teachers know most of the answers that their high school students are going to ask them. Every once in a while, there's like a zinger that you're like, oh gosh, I don't know, right?
I've been there. I'm a high school teacher. I've been there, done that.
So the nature of learning in Israel for the year is that you are asking these like massive questions. Not to say that the teachers here don't have an expertise, right? They've been doing it and they can sort of anticipate the questions. But the notion that a teacher will say, I don't know, let me try and find out for you, was one of the things that like lit a spark in a lot of the students that were involved in this study. And that ability for an adult who's like respected and admired and has an authority to say, I don't know, wasn't viewed as a negative. It was viewed as like a positive pishtaim shalosh. Like it was viewed as a massive. And so I think in this context, we can model that for our kids also. Why did Zadie have to die now? I don't know. I can talk to you about illness. I can talk to you about, arichos yamim. I can talk to you about like the science of these things. Why today and not tomorrow? Why today and not in 3 years? I don't know. And sometimes we don't know. It can be really unsettling, but I think it's only unsettling because it's unfamiliar, right? We're not good at not knowing things. It's actually one of the things that came out a lot about like all of the COVID stuff. There are lots of parts of it that were obviously very, very hard for a lot of people. But one of the things that's come out so far is the unpredictability of it was massively destabilizing. We're not great at unpredictability. We're not great at not knowing answers to things, which also is like says something about us, but okay, right? But that's one of the things that people had a very hard time with Corona stuff. And so I think if we can, I don't think we need to love unpredictability, right? I certainly don't. But if we can sort of allow that to become a little bit more familiar,
to embrace it a little more.
When our kids face other things that are unpredictable, it might stabilize them even just a little bit more.
Right. And in terms of the relationship with Hashem component, saying to them, we don't know, is saying we're not going to know everything about Hashem, right? Meaning like that, is that what you're saying? Meaning, and that's okay. And that's a normal, healthy thing.
Totally. It's the essence. No? Right? Meaning that's
I always say to my students that God by definition is something that we by definition, we can't fully understand. That's what God is. That's just straight up. And once they start to understand that concept, it's like, oh, okay, I can appreciate that.
Right. I'm going to understand as much as I can, knowing that there are limitations to my ability to understand things. It's a really hard concept for adolescents. Oh my gosh, a really hard concept for adolescents. We just want to like get the answers to everything and whatever. And I empathize. But the more we can allow them to become familiar with this notion that like we just don't know everything, I think it stabilizes them instead of destabilizes them and us. Right.
Sure. And do you think that the approach changes at all when we're dealing with something that's like a loss that's more tragic, either because like, someone who's really much younger than you would have expected, or that the way that they died, like there's so many examples of that. And the way does the approach of how we talk to our children about it change? Because we're not just talking about something as natural.
I think the underlying ideas are still there. We don't know. Right? Like you and I just in the next 5 minutes could probably sit together and come up with a list of horrible, heartbreaking things that have happened in the community just in the last few months.
Yeah.
I for sure can't explain how or why. I can't wrap my head around,
Sure. Yeah. It's very true. Yeah, no, that's the yesod of I don't know is a very important yesod for sure. Yeah. Would you say, as a clinician, what would be the best way for parents to respond if when children are pointing out things that are horrible things that are happening in the world, and yet Hashem is the one who runs the world? Like, how does that? How can we talk to? I guess obviously it will depend on the different ages, but how can we talk to them about that and help them to work through that?
Well, I think it depends on the ages, and I also think it depends on, the family hashkafa, the community hashkafa. Like everybody has like a different way of talking about, God's role in the world. I think if this works for you as a family or as a community, drawing the distinction between, not getting, super theological and philosophical about free will, but human choice, right? Mm-hmm. So God forbid, lo aleinu, there's a car accident, right? So it was someone's choice to get behind the wheel after drinking. That was a human's choice, right? It was a human's choice to not put on the seatbelt. God forbid, not blaming, not pointing fingers, but to say like, certainly God runs the world. And also we make a lot of decisions. And so sort of turning it into like an empowerment moment, almost of saying like, it's one of the reasons we always have to make sure we're making the right decisions. Like we can't make our decisions lightly. And in many ways it gives our children, and to some extent us as well, something to focus on that's productive. One of the things that comes out of, again, unfortunately, Israel a lot when there's a terror attack, or, every few years when we're, doing our drills, sitting in the bomb shelters, and, whether it's Hamas or Iran or whoever it is, one of the things that the Home Front Command always does when they're releasing educational materials and whatever is they give like to-do lists, very practical things. Check the batteries in your radio, make sure you have non-perishable snacks, right? Do you really need the radio? Maybe. Do you really need the snacks? No, because the likelihood of being in there for days at a time is just not how, these bomb things work. But what they have found is sort of the psychology of it is in moments of fear and pressure and stress, a lot of us do much better when there's something for us to do. And so, you're telling me I have to check my batteries? Great. I'll go check all the batteries in the house, that kind of thing. And so I think in the face of, God forbid, some kind of tragedy in the community, I think that's why very often there are Lashon Hara campaigns afterwards, or, different kind of activities that people can get involved in. A, because obviously there's inherent value in it. But B, because I think the human psychology of it is like, but I want to do something. What can I do with this feeling? And if we can sort of pour it into something productive, like, let's say, God forbid, a whole, campaign about drunk driving or seatbelts or whatever the thing might be, wherever it's relevant. I think that productive piece can be very empowering. It doesn't cancel the tragedy at all, God forbid, and it doesn't cancel sort of the awful heartbreak inside, but it gives us something to do with those feelings, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. A very good point. In terms of, there within the Torah, we have two very, very, I don't know if I would say contradictory, or two, very opposite realities, right? We have the fact that on the one hand, we have to teach our children Hashem loves us, and Hashem loves us, and Hashem loves us more than we even love ourselves. And at the same time, there's so many positive, components of that relationship. At the same time, there's also the tochacha in the Torah. It's intense. If you read the tochacha in English, like, you really like, it's harsh.
Yeah.
Right? It's really terrifying.
Yeah.
So how do we help our children? I mean, obviously we probably need to figure it out ourselves as well, but how do we help our children to make sense of that tension of those two total opposing realities? Like, how can we make sense of that?
So, I'm not sure they're opposing. That's sort of like the bombshell here. I'm not sure they're opposing, baby. Right?
Love it.
Because, there's this whole sort of theory of love languages out there, which is like, you can sort of profile yourself. There are ways to do it. If you're interested, you Google, there's like a survey you can take. What's your love language? There are 5 love languages. And it turns out all of us basically fall into somewhere around 5-ish categories. And it's not clear, is my love language the way I want to be loved, or is my love language the way I like to show love? Maybe I have 2 love languages, but the sort of the theory of this is that there are certain ways that we like to be loved, and we don't all like to be loved in the same way. Some people like to be loved by having somebody do something for them, acts of service, and other people just want to, spend time together. Just as 2 examples. I would say that if my love language, if it's very clear that my love language is, let's say, quality time. Okay. And so the way I like to be loved is by spending time with people. But the person who loves me only wants to buy me presents and is not actually around all that much. Then they're loving me in a way that I don't want to be loved. And it doesn't actually make me feel good. I don't want your presence. I just want to hang out. Okay. Lahavdil a million times. I think the Torah is Hashem's love language. And the Torah is Hashem's way of saying, here's how I want this relationship to work. Here's how I want to love you. Here's how I want you to love me. And the tochacha is ki'ilu, us saying, nah, we're going to love you in a different way. Nah, we're going to do this relationship thing in a different way.
Wow.
Right. And so it's not, I don't think they're opposites. I think it's the natural consequence of not paying attention to the way the person we want to be with wants to be with us. right? So what's the essence of like, let's say punishment in Torah? It's distance, right? That's what kares is. It's separation, it's distance. And so that's the natural consequence of someone treating me in a way that I don't want to be treated, assuming I'm healthy, right? Then if you're treating me in a way that I don't want to be treated, there's going to be a distance between us. I'm going to start to disconnect from you. And so it's not necessarily an opposite as much as it's just sort of like a natural consequence of, again, going back to human choice. Hashem is being very clear. It's not like there's like all this ambiguity. I just don't know how to connect to you. Literally, it's spelled out. No, we're not going to connect in all those ways. Some people love chesed and some people love davening and some people love learning and okay, all of that is true. But if all of these are options and I'm opting out of all of them and I'm feeling distance, that's on me because I'm not listening. Right?
Yeah, Hashem gave you the options and you're just not taking it.
Totally. The menu is there. The menu is totally there. And so by me opting out of all of those things, it's like my husband giving me presents when all I want to do is spend time together. Right. And so I don't think it's punishment in the sense of like, no, even though the tochacha is like totally terrifying and frightening. I think the essence of it is Hashem pulling away from us and saying, that's not how I want you to love me. That's not how I want this relationship to work. And if you're not going to love me in a way that works, then like, this isn't really a relationship because you're not listening, right? And in any healthy relationship, we have to be paying attention to the signs that are like explicit and not explicit.
Right. And what if a child pushes back and says, well, I get that and all, but this relationship, the way that you've given me these like Torah, the mitzvahs and all that I have to do, it's not the way that I want to, have a relationship with you either. Meaning like, a child can kind of say, and this is like, I feel like something that my students would say, like a teen would say, like, well, where's the unconditional love in that? Like this is like, if it's unconditional, then it should be however I want it to serve Hashem, which is, I know that gets into a whole separate thing, but how would a parent respond to that? Or so
I'll say something controversial. Here's my second, bombshell of the conversation. I don't know if I'm going to get like, mad emails after this. I don't really believe in unconditional love. I don't think it exists with only two exceptions. Two. I think Hashem has unconditional love for us. And I think most parents have unconditional love for their children. Every other love that we have, I think, is completely conditional. It's completely conditional. It's conditional on us doing the right thing, on you treating me well, on me treating you well, on us, investing in each other. That's completely conditional. I don't have unconditional love for my friends. If they treat me like garbage, that's not a friendship, right? Hashem has unconditional love for me. I don't have unconditional love for Hashem because I'm human. I can't. I don't know how. I don't have that capacity. And so I'll work to do all the things I need to do just the way I would work to invest in a friendship or to invest in a marriage or to invest in any of the other relationships that I think are like totally conditional because I'm going to strive for that intimacy with Hashem. But Hashem's love for me is unconditional. He doesn't have to work on it. He's got it. I'm the one that has to work on it because I'm human and like totally limited in my ability to sort of just like expand and limitless love. Does that make sense or do I sound like nuts?
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. I feel like for a teen though, they would say, but it's a two-way relationship, right? They would say, I mean, there's a whole separate thing. They can't see or hear and therefore they have a whole challenge with that too. But they would say if there is, this is how my students probably would say, if there is this relationship, then it should be both. It should be two-way. All relationships are two-way. So therefore they would have a challenge with that.
Meaning why? What's the essence of the challenge?
Meaning I could see a teen saying, well, Hashem set up his system, but if it's unconditional love, then why do I have to necessarily abide by his system? I should be able to serve and create a relationship with Hashem the way that I relate. I don't relate to necessarily talking to him 3 times a day. I want to do it 1 time a day. Or I don't even relate to talking to him. I relate to studying. Or I don't even relate to the studying, but I only relate to going and meditating in a forest. I don't relate to all of these mitzvahs. Why do I have to, and time-bound mitzvahs, and I have to daven by a certain time, and Shabbos, and I want to relate, if we're saying that Shabbos is about Shabbos Menucha and Oneg Shabbos, for me, my Oneg Shabbos is about going and sitting and watching a movie with my friends.
Yeah.
So meaning in terms of that relationship, the two-way relationship, I could see a teen saying, this doesn't feel really so two-way right now.
Yeah. Because it doesn't always feel two-way, right? Meaning when you're in a friendship, there are times when one friend is sort of like, let's say, needier than the other one. Right. And so, this friend is going through a hard time. You're also kind of going through a hard time, but like, you're just going to listen to them more than you're going to talk because that's where they're at. Right. I'm not saying it's a relationship of peers. A relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is not a relationship of peers. And that's the difference, right? In a friendship where we're peers, or in a marriage, or in other kinds of sort of like human relationships, we're peers. And so sometimes you get what you need and sometimes you get what you need. And, you sort of do that dance, whether it's choreographed or not. With Hashem, we're not peers. Hashem told us what he wants. Now, with that said, obviously, let's say there's a kid who's struggling in davening. Okay, so maybe there's wiggle room to explore what is that struggle about? Is it that you're just tired at 6 o'clock in the morning? So really, there's an easy solution. Just go to bed earlier. It's not a theological problem. It's a physiological, biological issue, right? That can be solved.
Right.
Is it that you just like have no idea what you're even saying? Because like, what the heck are these words? Okay, so get a sitter with English. Get a really good teacher who can sit with you in lunch and day by day, I don't know, go through one line of Ashrei every single day until you understand what Mincha is about, right? Meaning most people that have a hard time, let's say with something like davening, there's a really good reason why they have a hard time with davening.
Right. Sometimes you have like those who are having a hard time because they're saying, look, I davened yesterday and I asked Hashem to help me do well on this test, or for my favorite sports team to do well, or for me to, whatever it is, for me to win this competition or whatever it is. And I didn't. And therefore it's like, I've lost my faith in the fact that this actually works, like that there is something here. Now, obviously I understand, of course, that's an obviously completely incorrect approach towards davening. But for a person who is trying to learn about this relationship with Hashem, it's normal for them to necessarily have those feelings because they're obviously they're coming at it from a wrong standpoint. That's where they need to be educated. Would you say that that's a teacher's role, or is that more of a parent's role when they're going through that?
Well, you're asking an important question, because one of I think the big questions that's coming out of Jewish education, particularly North America, is who's responsible for my kid's neshama, right? I'm paying tons and tons and tons of money. You guys do it, right? And you're like, okay, but you're the ones raising them, so you do it, right? God forbid, I'm not, minimizing it or blaming or whatever. But I think that's one of the questions that's coming out. I think in a really healthy community, when things are sort of aligned, I think it's a shared responsibility. And I think in many communities, a lot of the educators and the parents do feel like they're partners in raising these children, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons why it matters to send our children to schools that are sort of representative of values that are aligned with our values. If you send your kid to a school that has different values, then it's going to be like a lot of mixed messages. But if you're the kind of family that says like, let's understand why you're struggling with davening, let's say, and you send your kid to a school where one of the teachers might say, hey, do you want to hang out with me during lunch so we can go through Ashrei? That's alignment, right? That's values alignment. That's education alignment. That works. If you're a family that says, hey, we want to figure out why you're struggling with davening, and you're sending your kid to a school who's just getting in trouble for not davening, then that's a misalignment. Right? Yeah. And so, I think it's an important question, and one that's not so simple to answer. The other thing I would say is, adolescents are obviously, not fully formed in their frontal lobes, right? And I love them. I love adolescents, right? But there's a reason they're not fully responsible adults. And so in those instances, this is how I view Shabbos. This is how I view davening. I davened for a good grade and I didn't get a good grade, whatever those things might be. We can actually take notes from the fields of, like, let's say marriage therapy, for instance, when very often when there's a couple that's in machlokas and they're sort of stuck before they even get to a part of like requesting, like, can you do this more? Can you do this less in the relationship? Very often the first step is like acknowledging what is working, like what is good. What do I appreciate about my spouse? What's working in the relationship? And so if we apply that to, like, an angry 16-year-old screaming at Hashem, I asked for a good grade, I didn't get a good grade. Fine, that's fair. We can talk about why you didn't study enough. We can talk about why you didn't get enough sleep, all those things. But before you start complaining about why Hashem didn't do this, that, and the other, how about you start with the things that Hashem has given you? that you are grateful for, that is working. Establish that relationship, and then we'll get to sort of like, the stickier parts. Why do you feel like your tefillos aren't being answered? But my guess is once you get through that stage of all the things for which we're grateful, you realize a lot of your davening is answered. And then it's much easier to sort of digest but I asked for a good grade kind of question. It's not one size fits all. It's not going to work for everybody. You have to know your kids, your students. But I think we can sort of take notes from different fields and apply it in these ways. To just make it less scary a little. God talk can be very intimidating.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned before that it's kind of like it's a shared relationship, right? Meaning it's parents and schools. And you mentioned that the parents' role is to kind of like start that conversation. So what would you say when a parent doesn't know how to, let's say, fully carry out that? They're not as well versed. They don't really have the ability to have that type of conversation, or even like you just mentioned, God talk. Like they're not so well versed. They're not as skilled in that. So how can a parent, what advice would you give for a parent to kind of say, oh, I see you're frustrated, but then the conversation goes and the child says, yeah, well, I dialed for this and I didn't get it. The parent just doesn't really know what to do at that point. What would you recommend at that point?
So I always default to the humility. I don't know. Let me find someone that might know, right? Because I don't want to say something and then regret it. And I'm going to spit things out just for the sake of feeling, right? So like always we can rely on the, I don't know, let me find out. But the caveat is you then have to find out, right? Like you can't tell your kid, that's a great question, let me find out the answer, and then just like ditch them, So like in the moment on a very tachlis level, if they're asking these questions, I think a parent can always say, I don't know how to answer that. I'm not sure. Let me see if I can find a good answer. And then in the interim, I think a parent can sort of look to like the riches of our community. Thank God we are living in a generation where we are surrounded by brilliant educators. It doesn't mean you're going to love all of your kids' teachers. They're going to be duds along the way. But somewhere in your kid's school, there's a fabulous teacher. Somewhere in your shul, there's a fabulous clergy or a neighbor that you just look up to and admire their family, or find someone that you can say, hey, I'm having this thing with my kid. I'm not really sure how I should respond. Have you ever dealt with this? Like, what do you think would be an appropriate response? And I think as much as there are a lot of potholes in our communities that we need to fix, a lot of potholes, I think one of the things we can feel really good about is that I think those kinds of conversations are very welcome. I think if somebody goes to a teacher and says, hey, I'm having this thing with my kid at home, I don't know how to answer. Can you give me some insight? I think that would make the teacher's day to be like, oh my gosh, like bonus.
Yeah, no,
like, of course I'd love to help you with that. Like what teacher would not want to be able to sort of, bridge the connection to home?
Totally.
So we have all these like jewels around us. I think parents can take advantage of that.
That's a great point. What would you say a parent can do? Because let's say, we're in a situation where a child does have a healthy relationship with Hashem, and they like doing mitzvos, they like Shabbos, and they like davening, etc. You fill in all the things, but they, go to a camp or they're in school or whatever it is, and they, let's say in class or in camp, it comes up a conversation of, well, how could Hashem have let the Holocaust happen, or other types of questions that, even though it wasn't their original question themselves, but as they hear the question being asked, they're like, whoa, like that, like kind of bugs them out a little bit, and kind of like, wait, I don't have an answer to that question. And if I don't have an answer to that question, it kind of like derails them, or it could, not necessarily, but it could. How can a parent, I guess, walk them back, or what can we do to, I guess, ensure that our child doesn't get derailed in the first place? Meaning, how can we prevent that from even happening in the first place?
Yeah. I'll throw in a few other examples, which is like the first time, one of our kids goes to a college campus that's not Queens, Turo, or YU. And, all of a sudden you're confronted for the first time with somebody accusing, Israel of being an apartheid and the awful treatment of the Palestinians, or even Kanye, like, oh my God, maybe all of my parents' friends are bankers. Like, maybe Kanye's right about anti-Semitism, right? Like, meaning anytime they're confronted with something that doesn't really match with how they understand the world, there is potential to be like, destabilized.
Yeah.
So I think it goes back to our conversation about resilience, and we can talk about emotional resilience, spiritual resilience, theological resilience. And I think that starts when our kids are little and building those blocks and talking about the things in, developmentally appropriate ways. I think that's sort of like one of the preventative pieces. Another one of the preventative pieces, a lot of this we're saying we're borrowing from different fields. So I would say we would borrow from the field of child safety and sexual abuse prevention, which is what's one of the key things to try to ensure our children's safety, is building a relationship with our children in which they know implicitly there is nothing they can't ask us. And there's nothing they can't tell us, that even the most weird, awkward, embarrassing thing they can talk to us about, because they know that we'll respond with like, grace and respect and whatever. And it's one of the big messages coming out of child safety education, is letting your kids know that even the most embarrassing things, you don't have to be embarrassed to talk to me about. So I would say with something like this, again, lahavdil, but for a child to know they can go to their parents and say, hey, I really don't understand how the Holocaust happened. And like, maybe I don't believe in Hashem. There are certain families where if the kid came home, they might get a potch for saying something like that. And those are the kids that we need to worry about. Those are the kids that are most vulnerable because they don't have an outlet to ask those questions. I think the kids who know they can ask these kind of like wild questions to, even if they don't even realize how theologically wild the question is, if they know that their parents are safe people to ask those crazy questions to, crazy in, parentheses, chances are they already have a little bit of a cushion to catch them when they have these big, earth-shattering questions. And that speaks a little bit to the resilience piece of being able to sort of not fully get it, but being able to be okay with that.
Totally. That's such a great point. I love the idea of like borrowing from other fields. That's awesome.
Well, we have to. Like we're really all talking about the same thing everywhere. It's about relationships. Yeah, it's about connection. It's about authenticity. That's really what everything is about, right? So we just 100%. Put it in different terms, and then it makes sense.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. Being that it's commonly said that children learn about Hashem the way that their parents model, and that's in general. And like I guess specifically, let's talk about authority. Right. So would you say that it makes sense then for parents to model the discipline model of Hashem, meaning rewards for good behavior, consequences for negative behavior, and then I guess you could even include in there like tshuva within parenting, the discipline. Is that something that you would say makes sense when trying to help parent our children towards having a better relationship with Hashem, or would you say that not necessarily?
I'm going back to my dissertation, which feels like a zillion years ago, but there are actual studies about different parenting styles and what tends to correlate with the strongest adolescent outcomes. Like we've raised our kids for 18 years. How are our kids turning out? And it turns out that our kids tend to be most successful when we parent with something that's called authoritative parenting. That means, to borrow Dr. Pelkowitz's words, he's, my Rebbe, he talks a lot about love and limits. That's essentially what authoritative parenting is. It's giving both. It's love within the context of limits. And so I actually think, sort of going back to some of the other stuff we were speaking about, that is the essence of our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem gives us the limits and then says, there's nothing but love. Like if you stay within these limits, this relationship is nothing but emotional intimacy. And I think that's what it is. It's not reward and punishment in Judaism is not you did your homework, you get a lollipop. That's not how it works. I do a lot of good things all day. I still haven't gotten my lollipop today and it's 9:00 at night, right? I don't get rewarded in that way. And I think that's where we get a little bit sort of off the path, which is, all the participation trophies and, I'm so proud of you, even though you barely tried, right? Like all those different things where we sort of indulge our kids. And we don't necessarily reward actual effort. And so I think going back to that conversation about closeness and distance, not God forbid that we would use that, as like a bargaining chip in our relationship with our children. If you do good, I'll be close with you. If you're bad, I'm not going to be close to you. Not God forbid. But, when you do something well, it might just be a high five, but if you really mean that high five, that's the reward. That's my parents having nachas, and that's acknowledging they have nachas in me, because that's actually how life works. Life isn't lollipop rewards. That's not, we're setting them up for failure if that's how we teach them to understand the world. The rewards and punishments tend to be much more sort of outcomes of our choices as opposed to trophies and lollipops. Does that make sense? It makes sense in my head. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, of course. That makes a lot of sense. 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm curious, as we begin to wrap up, would you say that, are there any things that within this topic, of the practical components of parenting one's children to have a relationship with Hashem that people don't think about or don't think to ask? Are there any things that you could off the top of your head that people really don't think about that so often?
I talk about this a lot in my classes when I teach some of in the gap year programs. And it's going to sound chutzpahdik, and I don't mean it, God forbid, in a chutzpahdik way at all. But to always remember to draw the distinction between Judaism and Jews, and that our relationship is with Judaism. It's not with the Jews in our neighborhood. I mean, of course, we have relationships with the Jews in our neighborhood, but it's the judginess and the fear and the keeping up. That's with Jews. Hashem is not interested in that. And I think if we can focus our energy on the Judaism and not ignore the Jews, right? That's who is in our life, but that's not the focus. That's almost secondary. I think our kids will end up having a much sort of a less stressful relationship to their relationship with Hashem, because a lot of the concerns that we have when it comes to parenting are about some version of what are the neighbors going to think.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's very true. It's a great
That's
point.
not how Hashem works. That's not the thing. And I'm not saying anything, everybody knows this. I'm just sort of, validating all the parents that feel this way, to make the distinction between Judaism and Jews, and that Hashem doesn't look at us when we're wearing something a little, eyebrow raising the way the neighbors will look at us. It's right. That's the difference, let's say, about that unconditional or conditional love, right? Hashem understands, okay, she's going through something. She'll figure out what she's going to wear. Okay, he's going through something. He's going to figure out what he's going to wear. The neighbor is like, oh, what is he wearing? Right?
Like, whoa.
Hashem doesn't, that's not, and I don't know, right? Hashem didn't tell me, but of all of my Rebbes and all of the people that I've learned from, I think that's the healthiest way to look at it. Again, I could be wrong. I don't know. Hashem didn't tell me. But I think if we can remember to draw that distinction, that might just help sort of ease the relationship a little bit.
How do we do that as parents for our children? I mean, how can we help our children to kind of let those walls down and not feel like got to keep up with the Jones at all points, at all times? We always got to be, matching up with the societal norms that we have. And if we're not, then we don't have a great relationship with them. How do we help our children with that?
I mean, it's not a good answer because it's not so easy, but you just don't, you know what I'm saying? You don't have to keep up. You don't have to have 6 different chicken dishes.
But how do you get that through to your children in a way that especially, I don't know if younger kids necessarily feel this as much, but as they get older, especially with teens, when they're looking around and it's really all about, as they're starting to break a little bit more away from their parents and more about being with their friends and their peer groups, how do you get them to really truly believe it's okay? It's okay. Whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter what everyone else around you is doing. But how do you get them to really internalize in a really sincere and genuine way?
So again, it's not a great answer, and everyone can be mad at me if they want. They're only going to believe it if you believe it, right? Meaning, especially our kids at that age are no.
That's the modeling you're saying,
right? Meaning, if you say it doesn't matter, I love you no matter what, but you're doing that judgy thing or you're doing the criticism thing or whatever, they see through it.
Yeah.
But if you say I love you no matter what, and they're sitting at the Shabbos table wearing a God knows what, and you're having company and you keep your mouth shut, those are the things they'll start to notice.
That says more to them.
Do you care what I'm wearing because you care what I'm wearing, or do you care what I'm wearing because of the company that's coming over? They know the difference, right? So again, I'm saying it's not a great answer. It's not fair, right? How could you just stop caring, right? But our kids will know we don't care if we don't care, or we do care if we do care, right? Like whatever.
Right. Yeah, totally. Okay, as we really wrap up now, any final message? Anything at all on parenting? And John, I know you have so much experience, and I see you have amazing posts. Make sure to check out Dr. Goldstein's Instagram feed. Great posts, especially on parenting, or anything about with all your dealings with seminary students and gap year programs. Anything at all? If not, totally fine.
I would just say, like, if we could just take it down a notch. Like, most things are not a big deal. Even the ones that seem like big deals are not a big deal. And like, we all have so much stress and anxiety in our lives. If we could just relate to the people we love in the way we think Hashem relates to us, it's just like, I love you and we'll figure it out and it's going to be okay. I don't know. I kind of feel like we'll all, not to be like so zen, on the top of a mountain, like everything's going to be fine. But I do think we're like a little uptight about things that aren't big things, but they seem like big things. If we just sort of take it down a notch and just say like, I love you and we're going to figure it out. I'm also speaking to myself as I say that. You realize that I have 5 children of my own, so I'm giving myself my own tochacha. But I think we take a lot of things really seriously that don't necessarily have to be taken so seriously. If we could just love a little bit more. I sound like a hippie, but like if we could just love a little bit more, I don't know.
I think we could all use a little bit of hippiness. That's true. I think it's good. I think it's awesome.
Okay, good.
Great. Amazing. Thank you so much. Really, such incredible wisdom. So many great bombshells, like you said, and really great insights. And I know that I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I have no doubt that our listeners will too. And thank you so much for all of your time today, or tonight in your case in Israel. And look forward to continuing the conversation at another time.
Me too. I would love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Jews Next Door. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I'd love to hear your takeaways. Reach out to us. Reach out to me at yair@genoff.org, hi@genoff.org. You can check us out on the website. You could leave a question there. We'd love to be in touch. Please be in touch. Check us out on Instagram at Parenting the Jews Next Door. Hit me up on Twitter at yair_menshel. And we're on TikTok now too. We have some great content, a lot of really great insights into parenting, tips, parenting pointers, reaction videos, and quotes. We have a lot going on. We have a lot of articles. You want to check it out. Check it out at genoff.org. You won't be sorry you did. And I look forward to hearing from you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe and share it with your family and friends. Looking forward to another great episode next week.